Bonjour à tous et merci d'être avec nous pour un entretien exceptionnel, exclusif, avec Jim Rickards pour nous faire part de ses derniers travaux. Bonjour Jim.
Bonjour Simon.
Avant de commencer, donc, je vais résumer le parcours de Jim, qui est avocat d'affaires. Il habite New York, il est américain. Depuis 35 ans, il conseille Wall Street. Il est aussi conseiller de la CIA et du Pentagone dans deux domaines très précis qui sont les risques financiers et les guerres asymétriques. Jim nous dira un peu plus tard ce que c'est précisément les guerres asymétriques. Et il est l'auteur de deux best-sellers du New York Times. Le premier est La guerre des devises, The Currency Wars, et le deuxième est La mort de l'argent, The Death of Money. Ces deux précédents ouvrages n'ont pas été traduits en français. Aujourd'hui, il est venu nous présenter un dossier exclusif qui est cette fois traduit en français. Il s'agit de 2024, le nouvel ordre monétaire. C'est le fruit des tout derniers travaux de Jim qu'il souhaite porter au public. Donc 2024, le nouvel ordre monétaire, c'est la chute annoncée d'un système qui est basé sur le dollar. Jim va nous expliquer pourquoi ce système est condamné, il va nous expliquer ce qu'il surveille, et surtout, il va nous expliquer comment surmonter cette crise qui sera beaucoup plus violente que toutes les précédentes. Non seulement la surmonter, mais s'en protéger et gagner de l'argent, et ceci très concrètement pour des investisseurs particuliers. Donc ce document, j'insiste, contient des véritables solutions pour tout le monde. Ce n'est pas juste un dossier destiné à l'establishment ou aux fonctionnaires. Cet ouvrage donc est maintenant disponible en France et vous pourrez le télécharger dès à présent avec le bouton qui va apparaître sur votre écran. Alors Jim, j'aimerais que nos auditeurs comprennent vraiment qui vous êtes, pourquoi vous êtes là aujourd'hui à Paris avec nous. Je pense que la première question, un peu mystérieuse, c'est comment en êtes-vous venu à travailler pour la CIA et le Pentagone et nous expliquer pourquoi ils ont dû vous appeler à l'aide.
That's a great question, Simone. The threats against U.S. national security are always changing. The threats we face today are not the same threats we faced 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And the intelligence community, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, is the best known, but of course it's one of many agencies that collectively make up the U.S. intelligence community. They're very adaptive, and so after the 9/11 attack, it was noticed that there was very unusual trading in two of the stocks that were involved in the attack, American Airlines and United Airlines. Those were the two airlines whose planes were hijacked and flown into the World Trade Center. But if you look at the trading in the several days before the attack, there was massive shorting of those stocks. So this came to the attention of various U.S. government agencies, CIA, but also FBI, our Securities Exchange Commission. They wanted to investigate it. But the thought was, well, if the terrorists were involved in insider trading before the attack, based on their knowledge, would it be possible to look at securities markets, look for unusual trading patterns, and perhaps detect the next attack? But the problem is the CIA had a lot of counterterrorism information, but they didn't have any financial experts. So they reached out and contacted me and others. I was part of a group who had Wall Street experience and securities experience. And we went in and we built models that really no different than what a hedge fund does. You know, a hedge fund or an investment fund looks at markets for unusual trading patterns. We were doing the same thing, but we were doing it for national security reasons to see if we could detect another terrorist attack based on prices in the securities markets. So we did this work for a number of years. We had some success at it. But those models that we built for the CIA, they're the same models that I'm now using privately for securities analysis and also to give warning about events in capital markets.
Donc, durant ces 35 ans passés à conseiller la CIA, vous avez élaboré des modèles prédictifs de catastrophes financières. Ces modèles ont prouvé leur efficacité. Vous les avez appelés projet prophétie. Le premier la première efficacité prouvée s'est produite lors de la faillite à la fin des années 1990 du fonds LTCM, Long Term Capital Management, qui était un fonds spéculatif. Et à ce moment-là, vous avez été appelé à la rescousse pour éviter que la faillite de ce fonds ne crée une très grave crise qui contamine l'ensemble du système financier. La deuxième occasion donc, a été l'attentat du 11 septembre et l'effondrement des tours du World Trade Center. Et à partir de l'expérience de cet attentat, donc vous avez développé des modèles qui regardent les activités de trading, d'échange sur certaines valeurs. Et ceci a permis d'éviter aux États-Unis même d'autres attentats similaires. Et enfin, à Londres, votre modèle a pu prouver son efficacité, encore une fois, donc c'est vraiment un modèle prédictif, puisque de graves attentats ont pu être évités à plusieurs reprises, donc à Londres même. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous raconter plus précisément ce qui s'est passé à cette occasion?
Well, these models, Simone, we worked on these between 2003 and 2006. It took us several years to do it. And we built the models using a number of factors. So we were looking for unusual trading patterns in stocks of companies that could be the targets of terrorist attacks. So what are the unusual trading patterns? What are the factors we looked at? So volume, volatility, price change, etc. Short interest, long interest. We looked at options. We looked at a number of factors. And what you look for is something unusual. So if a stock is going up, but the whole market's going up, that's not unusual. But if a stock is going up and the market's going down, that could be unusual, or vice versa, if the market's going up and the stock is going down. But then even when you do that, you say, well, maybe there's an explanation for it. Maybe the CEO quit, or maybe there was a scandal or something. So you say, well, you have to look at the news. So if the market's going up and the stock is going down, but there's some news, then it's also not unusual. What we look for is a situation where the market's going up, the sector's going up, one stock is going down, and there's no news. In that situation, someone knows something you don't. There's something going on behind the scenes, and the stock is trading on that information. So that's the first thing we look for. The second thing we did, there are over 6,000 stocks on the New York Stock Exchange and our NASDAQ stock market. That's a lot of stocks, and when you take all the data I described, second by second, it's an enormous amount of data and processing power. So we narrowed it down to about 400 stocks that were under the most threat. So what would these be? Cruise ship operators, theme parks, hotels, any stock of a company that could be a target. We didn't care about an ice cream company in Vermont. That was not going to be attacked by terrorists, but Disney might be because they have theme parks. So we narrowed it down, we got our factors, we built our system, and we were testing it. We were sort of in the prototype stage. So one night in August 2006, I was working late, which I usually do. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I had the TV on in my study. I had the sound muted. I was just sort of looking at the picture and writing. And I saw a flash report on CNN that MI6 and MI5 and New Scotland Yard were arresting terrorists in London. And I called my partner immediately because 2 days before that, we had received a red signal on our system. 2 days before the arrest, we got a red signal saying something is unusual in American Airlines. It's very strong. There was unusual trading in American Airlines. Well, I called my partner in the middle of the night and I said, turn on your TV, you won't believe it. And we saw this, and of course, what they were doing was shutting down a terrorist plot against American Airlines, British Airways, other American airlines, or airlines that would have a lot of Americans on them. There was a plot to blow up 10 airlines in midair and kill 3,000 Americans. But we had received a signal on that 2 days before the plot was revealed. Now, I'm not saying we broke up the plot, but what I'm saying is our system worked. This was very good validation because we saw that before it was publicly known. So this was, it was a good thing that, of course, the terrorist attack was disrupted, but it proved that our system worked, that it had very powerful predictive value.
Bien, Jim, donc nous avons vu le modèle prédictif en ce qui concerne les affaires terroristes, mais l'intérêt de ce modèle, c'est qu'il permet de prédire aussi les accidents sur les marchés financiers. Et j'aimerais maintenant que vous nous expliquiez un peu plus cet aspect des choses et la validité de ce modèle pour prédire les catastrophes financières.
Yes, that's a great point, Simone. You know, my partner and I had a very unusual relationship or understanding with the CIA. Typically, when you do technological work for the CIA, they pay you, but they own the intellectual property. But my partner and I came in as volunteers to help the intelligence community, but we agreed that we could also own the intellectual property. So when Project Prophecy was over, we were able to actually use that intellectual property, use that system ourselves privately in capital markets. And it turns out that it has worked very well. Now, I can give you an example of this. Let's go back to November 2014. What was everyone saying at the time? Well, they were certain, markets were certain, that the U.S. Federal Reserve was going to raise interest rates in 2015. And there was a debate, would they raise them in March of 2015 or June of 2015? So you had your March people and your June people. But I said on television in November 2014 that the Fed would not raise rates in 2015. And I felt very comfortable saying that. So what was the basis for that? What was the basis for that prediction or that prophecy, if you will, about, because here we are, the Fed did not raise rates in March. They did not raise rates in June. There's still a debate about when they will raise rates. That remains to be seen. But the fact is we were able to make a very good prediction. How could we do that? Well, we use a method. It's called inverse probability. So you start with an assumption. You make the best assumption you can. You may not have complete information. See, that's the thing about work in the intelligence community. You never have enough information. If you had all the information, a high school student could solve the problem. We get the hard problems where there's not enough information. But you make the best assumption you can. So my assumption at the time, based on economic speeches, based on Fed policy, based on economic data, was that they would not raise rates. Then, as time goes by, you get new information and you kind of update your prior hypothesis. You might raise the odds or lower the odds based on the new information. So taking the subsequent information, applying it to your original hypothesis, that's inverse probability. That's the method we use. And I just looked at the situation at the time. Well, why would the Fed raise rates? Well, they would raise them if they were worried about inflation, if they were worried about tightness in the job market, or if we had very strong economic growth. And I said, well, we don't have any one of those three things. Inflation's not a problem. There's still slack in the labor market. Growth is weak. It will remain weak. So it was very easy, using not any crystal ball or secret information, but using the Fed's own words, it was very easy to see that they would not raise rates. So we were different from the Wall Street consensus. Everyone said they're going to raise them in March or June. We said no. As the year played out, it turns out we were correct. But it wasn't a guess. We weren't going out on a limb. We were using a very rigorous method that we had developed in Project Prophecy for the CIA.
Bien, donc Jim, on a vu que le projet Prophecy fonctionne. On a vu aussi que vous avez le droit de l'utiliser pour anticiper ce qui se passe sur les marchés financiers. Et quelle est aujourd'hui votre anticipation? Et c'est une des raisons d'ailleurs pour lesquelles vous êtes là, ici aujourd'hui, avec nous à Paris. Qu'est-ce que vous voyez comme signe majeur d'éventuelles crises qui s'annonceraient?
Simone, it's very important for investors and everyday citizens to understand that the kind of problems and crisis we're talking about, this isn't 10 years from now or 5 years from now. This could happen tomorrow. It could happen in the next 6 months, a year from now, but it could happen sooner than later. Because the world is so connected, a problem in one part of the world very rapidly spreads to the rest of the world. This is, the IMF calls this spillovers. Some economists call it contagion. It's exactly what our models show. It's exactly how the system works. So in September 2007, I was in Japan, and the Japanese stock market was going down. And my friends in Japan were surprised. They said, we understand you Americans have a mortgage problem, but why are Japanese stocks going down? Well, the answer is that U.S. hedge funds were selling Japanese stocks to get cash to meet margin calls, and that was affecting other markets. So that's a simple example of how contagion spreads around the world. So you look at the world today, problems in Europe, problems in China, problems in the United States, South America, Brazil, all over the place. Any one of them could start a global cascade, and this will affect Europe. The idea that somehow China or Europe or the United States could be detached from a crisis in some other part of the world is not true. If it starts in any part of the world, it will spread to the entire world. It will absolutely affect Europeans.
Bien, Jim, c'est intéressant parce que vous venez de nous dire que les États-Unis sont en crise, que le système est très instable. Pourtant, ce n'est pas du tout ce que nous disent les journaux. On nous décrit une économie américaine qui va très bien, une reprise. Pourquoi pensez-vous que les journalistes qui nous rapportent ce que pense le gouvernement américain et la Fed, pourquoi sont-ils si loin de la réalité, à votre avis?
You know, Simone, if you relied on the headlines, you would think everything's wonderful in the United States and Europe has all these problems. That's exactly not the case. And so why are U.S. newspapers reporting, we have good growth, unemployment's going down, we've solved our problems, U.S. seems to be doing things right, Europe is making a lot of mistakes? That's actually not true. Growth in the U.S. has been unbelievably weak. We have 50 million Americans receiving food stamps or various kinds of welfare and assistance. Yes, the unemployment rate has gone down, but the only reason the unemployment rate has gone down is because people are dropping out of the workforce. You know, in the U.S., when you quit the workforce, you're not counted as unemployed. You're not even in the equation. Well, that number of people who have quit the workforce is at an all-time high. So our economy is actually weak. We're growing about 2%, but historically the United States can grow 3 or 4%. If you take a percentage point away over 35 years, one economy will be twice as rich as the other. This is incredibly weak growth in the United States. Now, it's hard to blame the journalists because they just report what the Federal Reserve is telling them. But let's look at the Federal Reserve's track record. Every year, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, has a one-year forecast of growth. So in 2009, they predict 2010. In 2010, they predict 2011, and so on. If you go back and look at the predictions and the actual results, they have been wrong by orders of magnitude 6 years in a row. They have no idea what they're doing. And that's not just an opinion. Look at the actual data. They say 3.5% growth, it comes in at 2. They lower it to 3% growth, it comes in at 1.9. They've just been consistently wrong. So the Fed has overly optimistic projections because their models are wrong. The reporters regurgitate what the Fed is telling them. They're wrong also because no one's really doing the analysis. No one's digging down. But if you dig down, you'll find that U.S. growth is weak. We have not solved our problems. We have structural impediments. When I look at Europe, I actually see Europe doing a lot of things right. Now, Europe still has a lot of problems, obviously, but you're working on labor mobility, unified banking regulation, unified deposit insurance. It's been tough in Europe, but they're making some structural changes. The U.S. is not. So the U.S. has left itself in actually a weaker position. The Fed models are just off base.
Donc Jim, vous pensez, vous savez, vous voyez que la situation américaine est beaucoup plus préoccupante que ce qu'on dit. Qu'est-ce que vous avez fait quand vous avez réalisé cela? Parce que finalement, ça ne doit pas être facile d'aller dire au Trésor américain, à la Fed ou au gouvernement que leurs modèles sont faux. Donc concrètement, est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer à nos auditeurs comment vous avez réagi et ce que vous avez fait?
You know, Simone, I obviously have a lot of contacts and interaction with financial colleagues on Wall Street and around the world and everyday investors, but I also speak quite frequently to the United States government. I've been privileged to have been invited by the U.S. Treasury and the United States Senate to come to Washington and either consult with them, meet with them, give them advice, or testify in some case at public hearings designed to solve certain problems. And they're very good people, and I'm very happy to go down there. But it's a little disconcerting. After the U.S. financial crisis, we had a new law called Dodd-Frank, named after a senator and a congressman. And Dodd-Frank set up two commissions, the Office of Financial Research and the Financial Stability Oversight Commission. These were the two bodies that were designed to manage risk. They invited me to Washington to meet with them behind closed doors to give them a private briefing about the risk models that I use and how I understand risk. Now, they were good listeners and it was a good meeting, but it was very disconcerting because it was clear that they weren't able to use these models, and they told me privately that they relied on the Federal Reserve to monitor risk. They were working on other technical projects, but they looked to the Federal Reserve to monitor risk. But I had met with the Federal Reserve, and I knew that their models were flawed. So I sort of did my best to explain how we look at things, how we analyze things, to make these new models available. And they're good people, but they were unable to move quickly, and they were still relying on these old models, these old equilibrium models. We were using new models based on complexity theory, dynamic systems analysis, and so forth. In my public testimony before the United States Congress, we talked about these things. It's actually on the record. You could go look it up. So we've done the best we can, but at some point, there's no more you can do. What we're trying to do now is talk to everyday investors through the newsletters, through the books, through these communications channels, and try to get the word out that there are serious problems.
Bien, Jim, donc c'est quand même surprenant parce que vous avez été entendu au Sénat américain, vous avez prévenu la Fed que les modèles étaient erronés, et pourtant rien ne se passe, aucune mesure n'est prise dans votre pays, donc c'est quand même surprenant. Pourquoi à votre avis?
Well, it's interesting, Simone, the difference between what government officials will say publicly and what they might say privately. Recently, I had dinner with one of the members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve who was on the Federal Open Market Committee. That's our central bank body that votes to raise or lower interest rates. And I sat at dinner with her, same way I'm sitting with you right now, very close, and we had a conversation, and privately they will say that the Fed does not know what they're doing. Now, I say that publicly, and people are a little surprised. They say, oh, how can you say they don't know what they're doing? But they tell me that privately. They say, look, this is unprecedented. Quantitative easing has never been tried before. This is an experiment. I actually met recently with the former chairman, Ben Bernanke. We met in Korea, and he told me the same thing. He said, this is an experiment. Well, remember, in science, most experiments fail. They blow up in the laboratory. So what this one governor told me is we try something. If it works, we might do a little more. If it doesn't work, we try something else. But everything's an experiment. It's almost like a chef in a kitchen trying different ingredients. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails. But the idea that the central bankers know what they're doing, that they have it all under control, that they're guiding the economy is false. They don't know what they're doing. They've told me that privately. So I'm just trying to get that message out and convey that to everyday investors.
Donc il faut rien attendre du gouvernement, c'est ça?
Well, you know, Simone, I'm an American, and I started my newsletter in the United States. So why am I in France? Why are we here? Because the global crisis coming will affect everyone. It will affect Europeans. It will affect the French. Nobody is safe from this. So I really wanted to come here. I'm very happy we've got the French version of the newsletter and get the word out to the French and Europeans that they're in the same difficulty as Americans and Chinese and everyone else in the world.
Bien, Jim, donc vous êtes ici pour nous prédire que va venir des États-Unis une crise encore plus destructrice que celle de 2008, une crise que le gouvernement américain et la Fed n'a pas vu venir. Mais finalement, est-ce que vous n'êtes pas en danger? Est-ce que vous ne courez pas de risque à dire tout ça chez nous et à l'étranger?
Well, I don't worry very much about my personal safety. You know, the models that we use to get predictions and advice for investors, they're proprietary. We invented these ourselves. Now, some of the science has been around for a while. What we've done is taken pre-existing science and applied it to capital markets for the first time. So these are things that we've actually invented ourselves. They're not really that well understood. You know, the government's still using the old models. We're using the new models. We're getting much better results. So we're very happy with that.
Bien, Jim, donc vous nous dites que le dollar est au bord de l'effondrement, et pourtant l'euro baisse face au dollar globalement depuis plus d'un an. Alors comment se fait-il?
Well, there's no doubt that the dollar is fairly strong today, but you go back to 2011, the dollar was extremely weak. So this is the currency wars, where the relative values of the currencies go back and forth, almost like scales going up and down, because the dollar and the euro cannot both be weak at the same time. You can have a weak dollar or a strong euro, or you can have a strong dollar, weak euro, but they can't both be strong or both be weak at the same time because it's a cross rate. And so what's been happening in the world since 2011, the U.S. is the largest economy in the world. So the U.S. in effect said, hey, if we collapse, the whole world will collapse. So you need to let us have a weak currency, which we did in 2011. But then Japan was in difficulty. So the U.S. said, okay, well, Japan can have a weak yen also. And this was Abenomics, which came out in December 2012. So 2011 was the time of the weak dollar. 2012, 2013 was the time of the weak yen. Well, who was suffering the whole time? It was Europe, because you had a strong euro. If you have a weak dollar and a weak yen, you're going to have a strong euro. But Europe had 2 recessions in 5 years. So finally, by 2014, everyone agreed that you could have a weak euro. And then Mario Draghi had negative interest rates in the middle of 2014 and European quantitative easing in 2015. So today we have a weak euro, but there's only one problem. Everyone thought that you could have a strong dollar and a weak euro to help Europe because the U.S. economy was so strong, but the U.S. economy is not strong. the US economy is weak. So now we may need a weak dollar again, which means that the euro will actually get stronger. But the problem is there's no escape from these currency wars. They just go back and forth and back and forth. What we really need is growth, but there's not enough growth in the world. There's not enough growth, too much debt. That's why you have currency wars. They're going to continue.
Pour vous, en fait, le souci, c'est trop de dettes, pas assez de croissance, c'est ça?
Well, Simone, 2011 was the time of the weak dollar and the strong euro. Today we have a strong dollar and a weak euro, but it's sort of like scales. It just goes back and forth and back and forth. This is what the currency wars are all about. Currency wars arise when there's too much debt, not enough growth. That's the situation we face today. So, yes, we have a weak euro now, but the U.S. is not growing. We don't have enough growth in the U.S. So we may soon see a weaker dollar and a stronger euro.
Ok. Bien, donc trop de dettes, pas assez de croissance. Qu'est-ce qui va se produire? Quelle est la solution?
You know, Simone, we talked about one dynamic, which is, when you have a strong dollar, a weak euro, and then you can have a weak dollar, strong euro. It's like scales going back and forth. But there's another dynamic, what we call the tug of war, when two strong teams are pulling on a rope. Not much happens at first. But what are the two strong teams? There's a lot of tension on the rope. What are the teams? One is deflation. The other one is inflation. The natural state of the world today is deflationary. You have demographic, technological, debt and deleveraging forces creating deflation. But central banks can't have deflation. They want inflation because it's the only way out of the debt problem. When you have too much debt, one solution is to inflate the currency, then the real value of the debt goes away. So the world is pursuing deflation. Central banks want inflation. It's a very unstable dynamic. But at the end of the day, the central banks will win. If they print money and they don't get inflation, they'll print more. And if they don't get inflation, they'll print more. They'll keep going. Eventually, they'll get the inflation. It can come very quickly and surprise a lot of people and destroy a lot of wealth. That's why people need to prepare today.
Donc c'est clair, je pense que c'est clair pour nos auditeurs aussi. Il y a trop de dettes. De la dette, c'est évidemment des obligations d'État. Trop de dettes. Les États veulent de l'inflation. Donc on sent bien que c'est tous les germes effectivement d'une prochaine crise sur l'obligataire. Et qu'est-ce que vous surveillez exactement en ce moment, Jim, sur ce sujet?
Well, Simone, in strategic intelligence, we look for what we call indications and warnings. This is something we do in the intelligence community. These are signs that things are changing and that either confirms what you think or causes you to revisit what you think. Now, right now, we've said that central banks want inflation, but they're not getting it. We actually have deflation. So you have this dynamic tension between deflation and inflation. So we're watching for signs of inflation. Right now, deflation predominates. What would the signs of inflation be? We would look for it in real wages, because if nominal wages go up, but inflation is going up also, there's no increase in real wages. We also look for labor force participation. So these are signs that labor markets are getting tight. Right now, we're not seeing them. Right now, it looks like deflation is still winning. But when labor markets get tight, when real wages increase, when workers can demand a raise, these will all be early warning signs that inflation is on the way. And that's the time to, well, actually the time is right now to get ready for that. But those are the signs we're looking for. That'll tell us that we're tipping from deflation into inflation. But the time to get ready for it is now.
Alors, Jim, quand même, il y a quelque chose qu'il faudrait préciser. Si le dollar perd de la valeur par rapport à l'euro, la zone euro risque la déflation, elle aussi, à son tour. Donc, la situation semble compliquée et inextricable.
That's right, Simone. You know, when you have a weak currency, you tend to get inflation. When you have a strong currency, you tend to get deflation. Right now, the U.S. has the strong currency, so we're getting the deflation. But if the U.S. says we have to have more inflation and we weaken the dollar and the euro strengthens, you'll get some deflation in Europe, which makes the debt problem worse. At the end of the day, each major economic zone, the United States, Europe, China, and Japan, are stealing growth from each other. But the problem is world growth. Where will the world growth come from? It's not coming from anywhere. We may need world inflation, and the only way to do that is with the IMF. So the IMF prints their own money. You know, the ECB prints euros, the Federal Reserve prints dollars. The IMF can print their own world money. It's called special drawing rights, or SDRs. They may print a lot of those to kind of create world inflation, and that will be a problem for everyone. That means we'll have inflation all over the world. The value of all the currencies will drop.
Avant de poursuivre avec Jim, vous avez déjà une chose que vous pouvez faire rapidement, qui est de télécharger donc son rapport 2024, le nouvel ordre monétaire, comment profiter de l'effondrement du système. C'est très simple, il vous suffit de cliquer sur le bouton vert que vous voyez apparaître au bas de votre écran. Dans ce document, vous allez découvrir des solutions pratiques et des stratégies d'investissement pour protéger votre épargne et vos économies. On vous demande simplement quelques euros de frais, mais je vous rappelle que Jim a déjà publié 2 best-sellers aux États-Unis, que la crise qui s'annonce va être encore plus violente que les précédentes et que, en fait, pour votre épargne, ce document pourrait avoir une valeur considérable. Bon, ce document, Jim, qui est là avec nous, a vraiment insisté pour vous l'offrir. Alors écoutez, si vous ne voulez pas être une victime de la propagande, être la dupe des médias mainstream, vraiment, je vous conseille de le télécharger en appuyant donc sur le bouton vert en bas de votre écran. Pardon, Jim, pour cette digression. La Chine a pas mal de problèmes en ce moment. On voit que la bourse de Shanghai a dévissé. On sait que leur économie ralentit aussi, que le pays, que les bulles financières ne sont pas maîtrisées. Mais en fait, ce que je voudrais aborder avec vous aujourd'hui, Jim, c'est la politique de la Chine avec son or. Que veut-elle exactement? Que cherche-t-elle? On sait qu'elle a plus d'or que ce qu'elle dit. Quelles sont vos informations sur ce sujet-là?
You know, Simone, the story of China and gold is one of the most interesting financial stories in the world today. Now, in 2009, I conducted a financial war game for the Pentagon, for the U.S. Department of Defense. It was the first time they had ever done a financial war game. I was part of the design team and then participated in the game. And we presented a scenario to the U.S. Defense Department in which China and Russia would accumulate vast amounts of gold, put them in a vault, issue a new currency backed by the gold, and abandon the U.S. dollar, say they would no longer take the U.S. dollar in trade. Now, we didn't think this would happen right away. It may not happen at all, but we were trying to get the Pentagon thinking about threats to U.S. national security. So what's happened since 2009? The Chinese have behaved exactly the way we predicted. Since 2009, they've increased their gold reserves by 200 or 300%. No one knows the exact amount because they're non-transparent about it. Officially, China says they have about 1,000 tons of gold. But there's very good evidence that they actually have 3 or 4 or maybe even 5,000 tons of gold. We get this information from a variety of sources. We know Chinese mining output. We know imports through Hong Kong. I've even spoken to senior officials of logistics firms. These are people who run armored cars and move gold. They said they have brought gold in to China overland at the head of armored columns of the People's Liberation Army. In other words, China is using military and intelligence assets to acquire gold. Well, why won't China be transparent about it? Why won't they just tell the world how much gold they have? The answer is market impact. China needs to acquire a lot more gold relative to the size of its economy so it can have an equal voice with the United States and Europe. You know, the United States has about 8,000 tons. The Eurozone, all the members who back the Euro, including France, have about 10,000 tons. They actually have the most in the world. If China only had 1,000 tons, it's not very much relative to China's economy. But if China had 5,000 or 6,000 tons or even more, then they would be able to sit at the table with Europe and the United States and have an equal voice in the future of the international monetary system. So China had to go out and acquire thousands of tons of gold. But the gold market is very thinly traded. If someone knows that there's a big buyer out there, they're going to take the price up a lot. So China has acted through stealth, deception, using military and intelligence assets, secret agents. I've spoken to some of them at banks in Shanghai and Hong Kong who go out and buy gold for China in small amounts. They do it in small amounts, they do it non-transparently, but their goal is to get a much larger amount of gold. Eventually they will announce it, maybe even later this year, remains to be seen. But I think we're getting closer to the point where China surprises the world by telling us how much gold they actually have.
Donc en fait, est-ce que vous recommanderiez à nos auditeurs de faire la même chose que ce que font les Chinois, c'est-à-dire de prendre une couverture en achetant de l'or?
Every investor should have some gold in his or her portfolio. Now, not 100% gold. I recommend about 10%. So if you have €1 million, have maybe 100,000 euros in gold. If you have 100,000 euros, maybe you have 10,000 euros in gold, about 10% of your investable assets. This is a kind of insurance. So if nothing bad happens and the price of gold doesn't move very much, it's fine. It's going to be okay in your portfolio. But if everything else collapses, your gold is your insurance. It's like buying fire insurance on your house. You don't want your house to burn down. But if it does, you're very happy to have the insurance. So I recommend 10% gold, but not paper gold. There are all kinds of contracts, futures, options, forwards on gold. None of these contracts will be honored. When gold spikes, when gold goes up 1,000%, those contracts will not be honored. The counterparties will just tear them up and send you a check, but you won't have the price participation. So have physical gold in your portfolio.
Vous pouvez en savoir plus sur tout ça, évidemment. Tout ça est très détaillé dans le rapport de Jim. Encore une fois, il vous suffit de le télécharger. Bien, maintenant, Jim, j'aimerais qu'on aborde un autre sujet. J'ai été frappé en 2011, lorsque j'ai lu Currency War. Vous étiez le premier à parler d'un plan du FMI pour remplacer le dollar comme devise internationale et monnaie d'échange. Et maintenant, on commence à voir s'étaler dans la presse les termes DTS, SDR. Et j'aimerais que vous nous parliez un peu plus de ce plan du FMI.
Simone, today, you know, when you look at any newspaper, television, internet, everyone in the financial space is talking about special drawing rights, SDRs, the IMF's plan for this world money. But I've actually been working on this for years. Go back to 2009. In 2009, the IMF actually printed and issued special drawing rights. I don't think anyone noticed. I talked about it on financial television in the United States, but other than experts in the IMF itself and some people at the US Treasury and elsewhere, very few people even noticed that the IMF printed SDRs as recently as 2009. They came out with a plan in 2010 in a paper that was very difficult to interpret. I wrote about it in my book, Currency Wars, in 2011, this plan to make the SDR the global reserve currency. So this is something I've been studying for years, and it's been out there for years, but only recently is it becoming more transparent, is the IMF talking about it a little bit more. Now, this is really the way the IMF thinks about this. This is not a solvency rescue, this is a liquidity rescue. When the world seems to be running out of money, when there's a panic, a financial panic, a liquidity crisis runs on the bank of the kind we had in 2008, that's when the IMF will come with these SDRs. They'll print trillions of them to reliquify the system. At that point, the price of oil will be in SDRs. Financial statements of major corporations will be in SDRs. They'll create an SDR bond market, SDR dealers, SDR futures, etc. There'll be a whole structure of the SDRs, the global reserve currency. We're not there yet, but the plan exists, and it's being worked out step by step. They're just waiting for the next crisis to roll it out, because what happened the last time? In 2008, the Fed printed trillions of dollars, the ECB printed trillions of euros. They're not going to be able to do that again. They're out of powder. It's going to be up to the IMF and the SDR. So we can see this coming. It will be highly inflationary for investors.
Donc évidemment, les DTS, on comprend bien d'après ce que vous nous dites que ça va avoir une influence sur les échanges mondiaux, ça va créer une nouvelle super devise avec des marchés financiers qui sont associés, mais vous avez dit aussi que c'était inflationniste. Est-ce que c'est ça vrai pour nous dans notre vie de tous les jours?
Yes, this will produce inflation. This is a problem for everyone, not just for banks and countries, but for everyday citizens. It affects all investors. You know, Simone, my reason, my motivation for offering this book is to communicate with everyday citizens in France. You know, the very rich can take care of themselves. They have their gold, they have their advisors. They'll be fine in a crisis. The very poor, unfortunately, don't have any assets. It's difficult to be poor, but if you don't have a lot of money, you're not going to lose a lot of money. But in between, there are millions of everyday citizens. They don't have the resources of the rich, but they do have investable assets. They do have wealth, which they've worked hard to earn. They rely on the elites. They rely on the bankers and the policymakers, but they're very much misguided by their leaders, and they need to look out for themselves. So I want to communicate with everyday citizens, everyday investors, and let them know what's coming.
Bon, le dossier en fait qu'a préparé Jim, c'est vraiment urgent de le lire parce que en fait, Jim, vous allez nous expliquer qu'il y a une date clé qui est octobre 2015 et que à partir de cette date, donc tout pourrait s'accélérer.
October 20th is a very significant date. You know, Simone, we've been talking about the special drawing right, the SDR. That's this IMF world money. But how do you determine the value of an SDR? Well, they have a formula, and there are 4 currencies that are used to determine the value. It's the euro, the US dollar, the Japanese yen, and British pound sterling. But China is 10% of the global economy. It's not included in the SDR basket. So right now there's a plan to take the Chinese yuan and include it in the SDR basket. This will be a big jump in prestige for the Chinese. It will make the Chinese yuan the equivalent of a reserve currency, very strong like the euro and the dollar and the other important reserve currencies. That's underway right now. It was discussed at the spring meeting of the IMF in Washington in April. It's going to be discussed further over the summer. The IMF has their annual meeting in Lima, Peru in early October, and then they'll take a vote on this. And around October 20th will be when they officially announce it. It'll probably be effective January 1st. So this is playing out over the course of the year. We're getting closer and closer to this very important moment when the Chinese yuan is in effect designated a global reserve currency by the IMF. That could cause a rebalancing of portfolios around the world. People will want to buy yuan assets. They might sell euros or sell dollars or British sterling, etc. It remains to be seen exactly what the new formula will be. But it's a very important stepping stone on the way to making the Chinese yuan a global reserve currency and enhancing the power of the SDR, which is, at the end of the day, inflationary.
Pour comprendre et pour vous préparer à la prochaine crise, il faut donc absolument que vous lisiez le dossier qu'a préparé Jim, donc qui est exclusif, qui est en français, et qui aborde donc tous les points dont on vient de discuter, et surtout ce que les autorités comptent faire pour affronter la prochaine crise qui va être encore plus ravageuse que 2008. Donc dans ce rapport, Jim décrit comment on va passer de l'ancien ordre monétaire au nouvel ordre monétaire et il vous révèle tout ce que les autorités n'aimeraient pas tellement que vous sachiez. Bon, mais à vous de le lire, à vous de vous forger votre opinion. Je l'ai lu moi-même évidemment et je vous assure que Jim a le don pour expliquer des choses complexes de façon très très simple, même si vous n'êtes pas un professionnel des marchés financiers ou du renseignement. Et c'est vraiment expliqué de façon accessible pour tout le monde et Jim a l'art de trouver des bonnes images pour vous faire comprendre des choses complexes simplement. Vous avez compris en fait que Jim fréquente beaucoup de gens, circule, voyage. Notamment dans ce rapport, vous avez une entrevue, les résultats d'une entrevue, d'un entretien que Jim a eu avec un investisseur dont vous avez peut-être entendu parler, qui s'appelle Jim Rogers, qui est un grand spécialiste des matières premières et qui vit en Asie. Et Jim Rogers et Jim Rickards ont donc échangé sur leurs positions respectives, sur l'or et les matières premières. Et vous trouverez des révélations et des prises de position surprenantes dans ce document.
You know, Simone, we've talked about models that we use, predictive models to understand the economy, but I wouldn't underestimate the importance of good old-fashioned conversation. And one of the things that I do, I travel all over the world with book tours, speaking engagements, and I have the opportunity to meet government policymakers and famous investors all over the world. So I can learn a lot from talking to them. I had one occasion recently met with Jim Rogers, a very famous investor, commodities trader. He was the original partner with George Soros in the Quantum Fund. Then Jim Rogers and George Soros created separate funds, but Jim Rogers has been around for a long time. And we were talking about gold. And you know, gold wasn't that long ago. It was about $700 an ounce, even less. It was a good opportunity to buy. It went up to about $1,900 per ounce. But then it came down quite a bit to around $1,100 or $1,200 an ounce, where it is today. A lot of people got very discouraged. They said, this is a bad investment. It's not going anywhere. You know, I don't like it, etc. It was good for the people who don't like gold to talk about. But Jim made a very interesting point. He said, in any super move, a super move is when a commodity goes from here to a very high level, there's usually a 50% retracement. So it goes up a lot, it goes down, and then it really goes up from there. So when he saw gold go from 1900 to 1100, he wasn't particularly troubled. He wasn't buying it at 1900. He's actually buying more now, that's what he told me. But he said a 50% retracement is not unusual, but now it's formed a foundation. It could be getting ready for the next leg up. I thought it was a very interesting insight. He said he's seen it in many commodities over decades of experience, and gold is no different. So we may, with the drawdown since 2011, we may just be getting ready for the next spike up.
Avant de conclure cette interview avec Jim, je voudrais dire que, en plus du rapport, la lettre Intelligence stratégique faite par Jim va vous permettre de suivre le développement de cette crise au jour le jour et vous proposer beaucoup plus de solutions adaptées aux développements qui vont se produire. Et ces solutions sont réellement adaptées aussi à un public français ou investisseur en zone euro et qui a une épargne à protéger en zone euro. Donc cette lettre, elle a été lancée déjà un peu partout dans le monde, aux États-Unis évidemment, mais aussi donc en Argentine, au Royaume-Uni, au Chili, en Australie et maintenant en France. Donc dans cette lettre, vous allez trouver des documents audio, vous allez trouver une analyse de l'actualité faite par Jim qui est, vous l'avez compris, très loin de ce que vous pouvez trouver dans les médias mainstream, mais plutôt en avance. Et en téléchargeant donc le rapport 2024 Nouvel Ordre Monétaire, vous aurez un mois d'abonnement gratuit à cette lettre. Avec votre abonnement à Intelligence Stratégique, Jim a préparé un autre dossier qui vous permettra de ne pas être victime de la propagande des autorités et qui s'appelle les 30 flocons. Donc j'aimerais, Jim, que vous nous parliez de ce dossier supplémentaire et de ce qu'il contient et en quoi il est utile.
Simone, the complexity theory that we use in our predictive models has a lot of mathematics. I don't expect everyone to be a mathematical expert, but we try to use some real-world examples of complex systems to explain it to people. And one of the best ones is what we call the snowflake and the avalanche. Now, the avalanche is a very unstable pack of snow on the side of a mountain. If you're an expert, you can watch it build up, so it's snowing, and the snowpack is getting bigger and bigger, and someone can look at it and say, it's in the wrong place, it's unstable, it's windswept. We know it's going to collapse someday. So what happens? So a snowflake comes along, it disturbs a few more snowflakes, that gathers momentum, it creates a chute, it creates a slide, the whole thing comes loose, it comes down, kills skiers, and buries the village below. Who do you blame? Do you blame the snowflake or do you blame the unstable snowpack? Now, as a systems analyst, I look at the unstable snowpack. I say, if it wasn't one snowflake, it would have been the other, the one before, the one after. Don't blame the snowflake. Look at the instability of the system. And that's how I look at the global financial system. It's very unstable. But still, investors want to know, well, which snowflake will it be? Can you give a specific example? So we do have, we've offered what we call 30 snowflakes, 30 examples of things that could cause the avalanche to begin. I hope the readers and subscribers are interested in them. One of the ones we mentioned is a credit crisis in China. That may be happening already. That snowflake may already have started an avalanche. Let's see, but there are many more. So those are examples we give. Could be a natural disaster, a political catastrophe, a credit crisis, either in China, Europe, the United States, etc. So we talk about all of these, and I hope the readers enjoy them.
Mais ce n'est pas tout. En fait, vous avez préparé encore un nouveau rapport pour vos abonnés à Intelligence Stratégique, donc qui est aussi un cadeau. Ce rapport, en fait, résume des conseils que vous avez obtenus de la part d'un des plus grands investisseurs de la planète, puisqu'il s'agit de Warren Buffett. Et donc, est-ce que vous pouvez nous détailler un peu ce qui figure dans ce rapport, en quoi la stratégie de Warren Buffett, elle peut être applicable par quelqu'un qui n'a pas la fortune de Warren Buffett?
Simone, this is the most challenging environment for investors that I've ever seen in my career. If I told you we were definitely going to have inflation, you would know what to do. You would buy gold and land and other assets. If I told you we were definitely going to have deflation, you would know what to do. You would buy bonds and other assets that would do well in deflation. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where it could be either one. The forces of inflation and deflation are like tectonic plates pushing against each other, building up tension, building up force. Now, right now, prices are not changing very much, but But the deflationary force and the inflationary force are pushing against each other. It's just a matter of time before there's an earthquake. It'll snap, but it could snap one way or the other. We don't know which way. So a smart investor would be prepared for either outcome. So you want really both. We call this a barbell strategy. You have some inflation protection in the form of gold, silver, fine art, land. You have some deflation protection, mainly in the form of bonds. And then in between, you have cash. And cash gives you optionality. Cash lets you turn one way or the other. Once we get some more clarity, you can be the one who maybe buys more gold or maybe buys more bonds, depending on how things turn out. So the inflation, deflation, protection with cash in the middle, that's our barbell strategy. Now, who's doing this? Warren Buffett, the most famous investor in the world. Warren Buffett has been going out buying hard assets. He bought a railroad. A railroad is nothing but hard assets, land, mining rights, switches, signals, yards, etc. It makes money moving hard assets, coal, wheat, corn, steel. So that's the ultimate hard asset play. Warren Buffett also bought oil and natural gas reserves. So that's his inflation protection. But he also has $55 billion in cash. That's the most cash his company, Berkshire Hathaway, has ever had. So when I look at Warren Buffett, I see someone who actually sees the same thing I see. He's ready for both. He's ready for inflation and deflation. That's what we recommend for investors.
Ce n'est pas tout. Jim vous a préparé encore un autre rapport qui sont 3 placements exclusifs qui devraient bondir de 100% lors de la prochaine crise. Alors dans ce rapport, vous trouverez comment vous placer, comment tout mettre en œuvre. Et encore une fois, ce n'est pas difficile, ce n'est pas compliqué, ce n'est pas réservé à des gros gérants de hedge funds, c'est fait pour vous. Avec ces 3 cadeaux, donc vous allez être préparé à toutes les éventualités. Quant à Jim, lui, il a rempli son engagement important, qui était d'informer le grand public de ce qui se déroulait réellement dans les organismes officiels et les instances de régulation. Et on ne peut que l'en remercier. Alors n'hésitez pas à parler de ces documents autour de vous. Ces documents permettent d'anticiper et de prendre les mesures qui s'imposent à n'importe qui pour surmonter la crise que nous prévoyons. L'anticipation, en fait, c'est le secret de la victoire. Et nous espérons, et c'est notre but en tous les cas, que vous sortiez plus prospère de cette crise qu'avant. Alors, n'attendez pas pour commander donc le dossier confidentiel de Jim, c'est maintenant, plus donc votre mois d'essai d'abonnement à la lettre intelligence stratégique, plus vos 3 rapports. Donc tout ça, vous pouvez le commander très simplement en cliquant sur le bouton vert qui apparaît en bas de votre écran. Nous allons terminer ici cette rencontre, en tous les cas la première partie. Merci à Jim d'avoir répondu à tous les sujets très très larges que nous avons abordés. On va faire une courte pause et puis on va se retrouver. Je poserai 5 questions plus précises, plus ponctuelles à Jim, dont on va profiter de cette visite. Et il va nous répondre succinctement sur ces 5 questions. À tout à l'heure.